Okay, we're in Hebrews 13. We almost certainly won't finish it. I'm going to read from verse 7. Hebrews 13, verse 7. Remember your leaders, those who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Don't be carried away by all kinds of strange teachings, for it's well for the heart to be strengthened by grace, not by not by foods, which have not benefited those who walk in them. We have an altar from which those who officiate in the tent have no right to eat. For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. Therefore, Jesus also suffered outside the city gate in order to sanctify the people by his own blood. Let us then go to him outside the camp and bear the abuse he endured. For we have here no lasting city, but we are looking for the city that is to come. Through him, then, let's continually offer a sacrifice of praise to God, that is, the fruit of the lips that confess his name. Don't neglect to do good and to share what you have, for by such sacrifice is God pleased. Obey your leaders, etc. I'll pause there. So a handful of things to note. As those of you who've been here will have recalled, we've talked a lot about this. For anybody who's new, sorry, this will be maybe slightly jarring, but one thing that's basic to Hebrews is that there is the earthly tabernacle and the heavenly one. This is explicit in Hebrews 8, of course, and that there is a heavenly tabernacle. You see this in Hebrews 8:1, where he says, for the main point in what we are saying is this, that we have such a minister in the, where is it? The main point of what we were saying is this, is that we have a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of majesty in the heavens, a minister of the holy things of the true tent, which the Lord pitched, not humans. For every high priest is appointed to offer gifts and sacrifices. Therefore, it is necessary for him to have something to offer. And if he were on earth, he would be no priest at all, since there are already those who offer gifts according to the law, who serve a blueprint and a shadow of the heavenly things, just as Moses was appointed, And he goes on. So the point is that he explicitly names, A, the fact that the earthly tabernacle is a copy of the true one. So that there's a heavenly tabernacle, which he calls the true one. So there's a tabernacle that exists in heavenly space. And that he says, Christ is our high priest in this temple, right? And not just our priest, but our high priest, which is important. And then he says in 8:4, if he were on earth, he would be no priest at all, for there are already those who offer gifts according to the law. And the point is that, again, in Hebrews 7, the main point of that argument had been that, look, how can he be a legitimate priest if he is not a Levite? Jesus is a Judahite, so how can he be a legitimate priest if he's a Judahite and not a Levite? Since the law requires that you be a Levite. And the way he answers it or resolves that issue is not to say, oh, well, the law doesn't matter anymore. He answers it by saying, well, yeah, the law that's been given to us governs this tabernacle. And it governs this space. And so, yeah, 8:4, if he were on earth, he wouldn't be a priest. But he's not. He's here. He's in this space and in this tabernacle, and therefore serves according to a different order of priesthood, the order of Melchizedek, right? So he's the high priest according to the order of Melchizedek, and he says that he got that priesthood not on the basis of a law about genealogy, which is how these guys get it. These guys become priests genealogically because they're Levites. That's the only requirement. Well, that's not true. It's one of 7 requirements. To be a priest, you got to be a Levite, right? So it's a genealogical requirement. If you are not a Levite, you cannot become one. If you're a Judahite, you're a Judahite. There's no process to become a Levite, right? But Jesus didn't stop being a Judahite. At his resurrection, he remained a Judahite, right? That's even a big part of the author's argument. He is from the tribe of Judah, right? But his point is that this priesthood, this space is governed by a different logic, as it were. to be in this space requires immortality, because this is immortal space. This is ever-enduring space. And so he became a priest not on the basis of a law about genealogy, but on the basis of his indestructible life. In other words, he got resurrected, and now he has this imperishable life, and he is now a priest in imperishable space. So this is what chapter 8 is about. That's a long way around the barn to get back to 13. Don't forget, I didn't forget that we're actually in 13. The point is that he then says, this is the closing exhortations, and he says, picking up at verse 9, don't be carried away by all kinds of foreign or strange teachings, for it's well for the heart to be strengthened by grace and not by foods which have not benefited those who walk in them. And last week we talked about how the fact that there's a couple different options for this. Some people have taken this wrongly, in my opinion, that this is a sort of a disparaging comment about sort of the dietary laws or something like that. The reason I don't think that's the case is because it would go against the logic that Hebrews has been working with. He never makes his comparisons by disparaging law. He always makes it by improving upon it, right? But the comparison is always one of good, better. It's never Jesus good, this stuff law stuff is strange and bad, right? It's always the point that like, hey, this was good, this one's better. This priesthood is good, this is better. Sacrifice was good, limited, this sacrifice is better, unlimited, right? All that sort of stuff, right? And so if this were suddenly a comment about sort of the dietary laws, it would be a total abandonment of his entire strategy throughout the argument. It would be suddenly now talking about the law as if it were strange and bad, right? When that's never been what he's been saying. And so I think the evidence points to the fact, a couple different ways. I won't rehearse them. For right now, actually I still don't know what I think, but I think it could be that food's a metaphor for teaching. Because he says, it's don't be carried away by all kinds of strange teachings, because it's good for the heart to be strengthened by grace, not foods. And I think there, foods is standing in for, it could be that it's standing in for teachings, and parenthetically, the strange teachings. The evidence for that is the fact that earlier in Hebrews, he uses the metaphor of food as teaching, right? He says, look, you guys should be eating solid food, but you still need milk. So and Paul used the same metaphor in 1 Corinthians. So that's one possibility. It could be that the food bit is a metaphor about teaching, consonant with his own prior use of that metaphor in Hebrews 3 and 4, chapter 5, verses 12 through 13, and 1 Corinthians 3, not that they're the same author. And so he's saying, look, don't be led away by strange teachings. Have your heart strengthened by grace, not by strange teachings, right? That's sort of the idea. If it is literal food, which is possible, Steve and I were talking about this last week, I think the higher probability is that it would be food sacrificed to images. In other words, don't let anyone lead you astray into thinking that it's okay for you to eat food sacrificed to images, idols. Because like we're people who have access to this tent. We have access to this altar, so don't go to other foreign altars, right? That sort of idea. Right? So then, this is an even longer way around the barn to get to verse 10, because verse 10 is kind of the complicated one. We have an altar from which those who officiate in the tent have no right to eat, for the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. Therefore, Jesus also suffered outside the gate in order to sanctify the people by his own blood. A lot of options here, but here's today how I think it works. I've kind of moved on this a lot because it's really complicated. Just checking the time. First thing you have to know is going back to sacrificial law. This is a sort of a model of the tabernacle. This is this is the tent. So if you were standing here and looking at this, you would just see an enclosed tent. You wouldn't actually see these things, right? It's an enclosed tent. But if you were standing here, you would see this. This is all exposed to air. In other words, it's a courtyard. So you'd be able to see this. This is the altar for burnt offerings. If I commit, or if this guy rather commits a sin, he would bring what's called a sin offering. And so he would bring his animal right here. And either he or the priest, it's not clear, would slaughter it, slit the throat. And then the blood would be caught in a bowl. So now you've got the blood here, and then the animal would be split up, quartered. And then the priest would go here and sprinkle some of the blood there, and then would divide up portions of it and put some of those pieces there. Portions of the meat, though, this is the part, portions of the meat would be edible by the priest who gave it. So if I bring this offering, I certainly can't eat it because then I'd be benefiting from my own sin, right? Like if I commit a sin and then I bring an offering and then I get to eat from it, it's sort of like you get to benefit from your own sort of offering for sin, so you're sort of obliquely benefiting from your own sin. However, the priests are these officiants who are appointed to do all this work, and they're not appointed land for crops or whatever else, and so they effectively get their sustenance by the things that people bring. And so if you are a priest, portions of this meat go on this altar, the altar for burnt offering, but portions of it go to the priest who burned it, and they get to eat it. The exception is if there's a serious offense, whether it's a serious offense by a layperson or let's say a priest committed an offense or the high priest committed an offense, then they would also have to bring an offering, right? And then that blood doesn't get sprinkled here. It goes inside the tent and it's sprinkled here. Then the ruling in Leviticus is, if any blood goes in this tent, no one may eat of it. Any bits that are burned here, the rest of it are burned outside the camp so that there's no meat left over. So in other words, if it's the sort of offense for which the ritual requires that you take the blood of the animal all the way into the tent, none of that meat is edible by anybody. It's all consumed either on the altar or burned in the outside, right? Yeah.
Do you know what type of sins are those?
Yes, Leviticus 4 just names them all. It's typically unintentional offenses, but there are different, it's not so much different levels of the severity of the offense, except the degree to which it refers to the culpability of the offender because they ought to know better. So if a high priest commits the sin, like he really ought to have known better, right? So his unintentional offense is more offensive than, just this Elijah's, my son's, not the prophet's, unintentional offense, right? Assuming he were 12. You're like, okay, well, he's a 12-year-old, he doesn't know anything, right? And so the higher degree of culpability in that regard. Or it could be that if I'm the priest, I'm theoretically, because according to Leviticus 10, the priests are supposed to be the people who instruct the people in the law. And so if I make an error in instruction, and then I lead this whole group astray, like an entire tribe astray, well, now it's my offense, right? But I've led the whole community into an offense now. So it's a big deal. It was still unintentional, but it was a pretty big one, right? Because now I've led a whole tribe into doing something wrong. And he's like, all right, well, that happens, bring a sin offering and take its blood in here. And then the rule is, if blood comes in the tent, no one may eat it. All of it must be burned here, the rest of the animal. Yeah?
So Jesus being the high priest
Yeah.
offered a sacrifice on our behalf, but as if he did it to God. He was the high priest.
Oh, yes, yes.
He's offering a sin.
Yes, no, in fact, Hebrews says that, so he...
But it was for our sakes because we're the ones that did it. And so he offered himself directly inside the tent to God.
Yeah.
So that's where he sacrificed.
Right, so exactly. So Hebrews locates Christ's offering right in the heavenly space. And he says explicitly, the high priest in the earth, now you have to imagine the split again, heavenly tabernacle and earthly tabernacle. And he says that the priests down here have to offer sins both for the people and for himself, right? Whereas Jesus, when he offers, only has to offer for others, not for himself, because he, of course, didn't commit an offense. And so, yeah, his offering is on behalf of the people that are united to him or whatever, but not for himself. Yeah.
Right, but he took on that.
Oh yeah, for sure. He
So it was for himself because he took it on, right? Because he sinned, but because he took on our sin.
Oh, I see.
He took the blame.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, for sure. He participates in the fate and reality that we are in. That's what Hebrews 2 says. That in order to taste death for everyone, he became like his brothers and sisters in all things, becoming flesh and blood like we are, right? So there's a participation, in the realities that we're facing and bearing them on our behalf. But that's being distinguished from sort of his needing to make the offering for his own sin, right? Sure. Yeah. If that answered your question. Yep. So this is set up for 13:10. He says, we have an altar from which those who officiate in the tent have no right to eat. What does he mean? We have an altar from which those who officiate in the tent have no right to eat. I think he means that those who officiate in the tent, I think he's referring to the earthly priests. I think he's saying that if you are an officiant in this tent, well, you don't have right to eat the animals whose blood is taken there. Because, as it says in the next verse, because the body, look at verse 11, the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. In other words, if you're an officiant in this tent, you don't get to eat from that altar, because if the blood was brought in there, that animal's not edible. It gets destroyed. And so he's saying, look, the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought onto the sanctuary as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. So they have access to this altar, but they don't have the right to eat from it. And he's contrasting that with we, verse 10. We have an altar from which those who officiate in the tent have no right to eat. I think this is why it's complicated, because, it's probably self-evident why it's complicated. When he says we have an altar that they don't have the right to eat from, well, they don't have the right to eat from this altar. And so is he saying that we have the right to eat from this altar? I don't think so, because he's not referring to the earthly tabernacle. He's saying that they officiate here, and so they don't have access to this altar. In other words, remember, again, the point for so much of Hebrews is that there are two temple tabernacles and so two altars. These guys have access to this one. We have access to this one. Just because they officiate here doesn't mean they have access to this. We, though, do have access to this altar. So even though these guys officiate in this altar, they don't have access to this one, and we do. And so the really tricky part is verse 11, because then he explains that by saying, for the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought to the sanctuary by the high priest, sacrificed for sin, are burned outside the camp. In other words, the part of the reason why they can't eat from it is because the would-be food gets destroyed. Right? So the blood was brought in here, and the would-be food is destroyed. But what is true of Jesus? The would-be blood is here, and what's true of his body? It's not destroyed. It's there. We have it. Right? So we can participate in this altar precisely because, yes, his blood was brought there, but his body wasn't thereafter destroyed. His body and blood were brought in, and they both endure. So yes, his blood was brought in, but we still have his body. because it's permanent, indestructible life, resurrected, and now permanently in this space. I think this is of a piece with this point about permanent access. We have access to the heavenly throne room, etc., through the one who endures forever, and that's why he says that he lives forever, and so he can therefore intercede forever. And all those who draw near to God through him are saved completely because he always lives to make intercession. In other words, again, I think there's this point of contrast. Again, and it's a good point, again, to remind, by way of reminder. It's not bad, good. It's good, better. This was a good system, right? It worked for what it was meant to do, but it couldn't get you all the things that this one does. Because, look, blood that's brought in here, that's good. That means you're getting forgiveness, right? That's like the whole point of taking this blood into this bit of the sanctuary, is it procures forgiveness. And God says that and endorses it, right? But it then immediately has to be brought out and burned, and none of these people can enter into that space. Even the priest who brings it has to effectively get out quick. Whereas the difference here is this blood was brought into the sanctuary, the true sanctuary, the heavenly one, and Jesus doesn't have to leave, and his body doesn't have to be destroyed. We have access to that. And then he goes on, James, I see your hand, but I got to finish this last point before I'll take your question. But then he says, next, the third tier of complication is that then he goes back to talking about Jesus' body and coordinates a moment of his earthly ministry with the moment of this. He says, just as the blood, the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into this sanctuary are burned outside the camp, then he makes a play on outside and says, therefore Jesus also suffered outside the city gate. In other words, he does coordinate Jesus' crucifixion with part of the sacrificial process, but not with the process that we're so used to thinking he does. We're so used to thinking that he coordinates Jesus' crucifixion with sort of the slaughter of an animal, right? Right. It's a typical thought. The author of Hebrews literally never does it. He locates Christ's offering here in heaven, and then the one time that he does talk aloud about Jesus' death with respect to the sacrificial process, he doesn't coordinate it with the slaughter of the animal. He coordinates it, probably a bit oddly to us, but coordinates it with the burning of the body. Because I think of the logic, what happens to the body here? It gets disposed of, it's destroyed, right? And I think this is what he's saying. Like Jesus, just like these bodies are taken outside the camp, so in the same way Jesus suffered outside the city gate. So he's sort of coordinating Jesus' crucifixion with this moment of the sacrificial process because of his logic that, like, look, Jesus suffered, outside, and now I'm going to put a cross there. This is the moment he coordinates it. He suffered outside the city gate, but then what happened after that? Then he was resurrected. And with that resurrected body, went up into this heavenly tabernacle space, so that now we still have his body. So that whereas this one is just this body's destroyed, if you coordinate it like this, it's that yes, his body was destroyed, but then it was resurrected and went up into this space, so that now we have access to his body. Whereas these guys didn't. They brought their blood in, and the body just got destroyed, and that was it. Whereas for us, right, he's coordinated here, resurrected, goes in, and so we have access to it, which is why he says we have an altar from which to eat, etc. Okay, I saw lots of questions, Myra, and then James, and then we have to stop.
So it's a comment. So that's why the Bible says that he's perpetually interceding for us.
Yes.
Because he's in the heaven.
Yeah.
He's the only one because he's resurrected, so he can intercede from
Yeah.
right through the Holy of Holies.
Yes, precisely. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And the contrast there is, again, the contrast that the author of Hebrews makes in Hebrews 7 is that these guys, he says there had to be lots of them because they kept dying. And he enters into this space only once a year. So the high priest, only one person can enter into this space, and he can only do that once a year for approximately 90 seconds, and he can't stay very long. And he can't even look at the glory of God that's there. He has to wave incense cloud first, right? That the contrast with Jesus is, well, he entered into this space and never has to leave. So it's good that the high priest can enter here, and he does intercessory work there. It's great. But he's got to exit real quick. And this ritual has to be repeated. Author of Hebrews says he goes up there and never has to repeat his offering. He just is the offering that is perpetually in the presence of the Father interceding for us, because that's what he says, because he always lives to make intercession. Yeah. James, you had a...
Yeah, y'all just covered what I was
Okay,
going to say.
sweet.
Is that because it's a burn-up offering on earth, it can't be repeated, but because he was given a resurrected body that is perfected, and he's sacrificed, meaning that he gave his perfected body as a sacrifice to God. He belongs to God.
Yeah.
It's a perpetual offering forever.
Right. It's at the very least, it's an offering that is efficacious perpetually, right? Yeah. There's different ways to chop it up. I think though that's right. Yeah.
In God's presence.
Yes, precisely. Yeah. He's always in the one.
We have access because he is in us.
Yeah.
And so we get to be offered to God as well perpetually.
Well, and then it grounds his exhortation to continually offer to God, as in the next couple verses or whatever it is. Continually offer to God your thanksgiving and praise, for by such sacrifices these are pleasing to him.
He's got us forever.
Right, yeah.
If you have more time, you can almost back that up to 9, strengthened by grace.
Oh, yeah.
Not by food.
Yeah.
Your argument.
Yeah. It depends, though. How would the food then be, on your point? The food would be this one?
Right, the priests get to
Yeah.
have some of it.
For sure. I've thought about it. The reason I've
But you
confused about it
for teaching.
is because even if it's literal food, right, it could be teaching or it could be literal food, but it would then be him calling this strange. And strange is not a compliment in Greek. It doesn't mean like kooky or interesting. It means like right, like it would then be him calling this strange, which is ironically the strange thing for Hebrews. That would be the foreign thing. It would be the one-off. It would go against what he'd be saying elsewhere. So that's part of why I don't take it that way. But yeah, but it's tricky. It's also very tricky because in this closing section, in exhortations, you often get, like, think about Romans 12. It's just a string of do this, do this, do this, do this. Pray without ceasing. Love everybody. Don't do that. Don't pay back good for evil, right? In other words, it's a string of exhortations, not an argument. And so is Hebrews 13 like that? Is Hebrews 13 saying, hey, don't be led away by strange teachings? Next point, unrelated to that. We have an altar. Next point. Do good to your leaders. Next point. Stay humble. Like it'd be consistent with closing exhortation sections to have exhortations that are not logically linked to one another, and in terms of an argument, but are simply just exhortation. Next one, exhortation, right? So that's part of how I take it. Yeah. Anyway, we've got to stop for time. Let me pray. Father in heaven, thank you for this day and for this time together. Thanks for this chance to read together and study together. Thank you for the testimony that Sue brought earlier, and just the comfort and assurance that can bring on its own. Thank you for all the people here. We lift up again all the requests made earlier, and we know that you know them, and we're thankful that you go before us in all those things. We ask that this upcoming time of worship be edifying to us, to our hearts and our minds and our bodies, and glorifying to you. We pray all these things in Jesus' name.